Okay, biology class, this is again Mr. B back here, and we are continuing with our flip lessons, and then we are on Chapter 1, Section 3, Studying Life. So the last couple days we've been talking about exactly what scientists do, how they work, and so now we're going to take a more specific look at how we study living things by today's standards. So we're going to come back into the future a little bit away from what we've been talking about. So the first thing we're going to talk about is the characteristics of living things, and then obviously the question we're going to ask ourselves are what are some characteristics of living things. So first off, no single characteristic is enough to describe a living thing. There are some non-living things that share one or more traits with living things. So it's not really as cut and dry as you might think of what being alive is or not. There's some really definite characteristics that you have to meet. So we're going to go over all those characteristics now. So here is the list of characteristics that we have. So first, you're made up of units called cells. You must be able to reproduce. You must be based on a universal genetic code. You must be able to grow and develop, obtain and use materials and energy, respond to their environment, maintain a stable internal environment. You must change over time. So we're going to take a look at each one of those a little more closely. So the first one, living things are made up of cells. And since you guys are new to biology, that's probably a new term for you, but a cell is the smallest unit of an organism that can be considered alive. This is actually what our next chapter is going to be on, is studying the cell. So in order to be alive, you must be made up of cells. The next characteristic is you must be able to reproduce. So there's two types of reproduction. Sexual reproduction, which is when cells from two different parents unite to form the first cell of the new organism. And then there's asexual reproduction, in which a single parent produces offspring that are identical to itself. So in order to be considered alive, you must be able to make a new one of you, basically. You must be able to reproduce and kind of continue your species on. The next one is living things need to grow and develop. So during an organism's development, cells differentiate, which means that the cells look different from one another and perform different functions. So when we take, let's say, humans, for example, we have different cells in our brain than we do in our hands, than we do in our feet, than we do in our elbows, than we do in our knees. They all do different functions. So we are alive because we definitely have cells that have differentiate and they will perform different tasks. So our next characteristic is living things are based on a universal genetic code. So organisms store the information they need to live, grow, and reproduce in a genetic code in a molecule called DNA. So this will be, again, if this is new information to you, we'll probably have a whole unit about DNA. So just know for now that it is in fact a molecule that we have that kind of codes for how we look, how we act, basically everything about us, and it's passed on from your parents. So you have half your mom's DNA and you have half your dad's DNA. They come together to form you. So all living things need to have some form of DNA. The next characteristic is living things obtain materials and use energy. So the combination of chemical reactions through which an organism builds up or breaks down materials is called metabolism. So taking in those materials, breaking down how fast we can process them and use them for energy, that's called metabolism. So that's different in everyone, but every living thing, whether it has a fast metabolism or slow metabolism, has to have that characteristic if we want to consider it to be alive. So one of the next characteristics is living things respond to their environment. And so a stimulus is a signal to which an organism responds. So if I walk up to you and if I drop a book right in front of your face and it lands on your desk, it's like your response to that is going to be your stimulus. You're not just going to sit there like sit there like nothing happened. It's going to cause you to react in some way, shape, or form. So if you're not alive, then you're just going to sit there and not and pretend like nothing happened. So that is what a stimulus is, responding to something that happens in your environment. So the next thing, living things maintain a stable internal environment. So the definition behind this is, although conditions outside an organism may change, conditions inside an organism tend to remain constant. This is a process called homeostasis. For those of you who didn't know, we maintain an internal body temperature all the time of 98.6 degrees. So unless we're sick or something else is wrong, we're always going to have that same internal temperature, and that's our body performing the process of homeostasis, which is just keeping things all together, nice, nice and perfect and running for us. Again, that can be a lot of other things inside any organism's body. That's just one example of how staying consistent is, again, a key to being alive. Maybe if we weren't alive, if it got 100 degrees outside, then our body temperature would raise up to 100 degrees. If it was winter time out and it was 20 degrees, then our body temperature would drop to 20 degrees. But lucky for us, that doesn't happen, so we're still alive. So then the last characteristic they went over is taken as a group, living things change over time. So over many generations, groups of organisms typically evolve. So I know probably most of you heard of evolution. That's just a process of changing over time. We're going to have a whole chapter about evolution later on, so just know that living things as a whole will evolve over time. And really quickly, some branches of biology. These are just kind of some couple quick examples. Zoologists study animals, botanists study plants, and paleontologists study ancient life. So these are just an example of 3 of the many branches of biology. So every zoologist is a biologist, every botanist is a biologist, and every paleontologist is a biologist as well. So that wraps it up for the first part of this section. Let me know if you have any questions.